Stand at the edge of the Seine at dawn, and you are standing where Roman soldiers once unloaded stone for a city that did not yet know its own name. Walk beneath the shadow of Notre-Dame, and you are walking through layers of faith, fire, revolution, and rebirth. Touch the worn stones of the Ile de la Cité, and you are touching ground that has watched emperors crowned, kings executed, and crowds roar for liberty. This is Paris, a city that has burned and rebuilt itself so many times it no longer fears flame, a city that has overthrown its rulers, reinvented its identity, and turned suffering into spectacle. Empires have risen here. Empires have fallen here. Heads have rolled here. And through it all, Paris has endured. What you are about to witness is not just a timeline. It is a transformation. Through reconstructed scenes, restored images, and the echoes of centuries, you are about to see Paris not as a postcard, but as a living force. 2,000 years, one city. Let's begin where the river bends. It is the 1st century before Christ. The Romans arrived not to admire the beauty of the Seine, but to conquer. On a small island in the river, they find a settlement of the Parisii tribe. Wooden huts, mud streets, a trading post built on instinct and geography. The Romans do what Romans always do. They build in stone. They call it Lutetia. Straight roads cut through marshland. Bathhouses rise from the earth. An amphitheater fills with noise. Soldiers patrol the bridges. The island becomes a fortress of order in a land Rome considers wild. But Lutetia is not Rome. It is distant, peripheral, exposed. When the empire begins to weaken in the 3rd century, the defenses tighten. Walls are reinforced. Citizens retreat to the island. Fear replaces confidence. And then Rome fades. The legions withdraw. The administration collapses. The marble cracks. Lutetia does not vanish, but it shrinks. Stone is stripped from Roman monuments and reused. The grand baths become quarries. The amphitheater becomes rubble. Yet people remain. The Franks arrive, warriors from the north who will give France its name. In 508, their king Clovis makes a decision that changes everything. He chooses Paris as his capital. One choice, one king. And suddenly this battered riverside settlement becomes the political heart of a new kingdom. Christianity deepens its roots. Churches rise where temples once stood. The island becomes sacred ground. The city spreads slowly outward, hugging the river like a living thing afraid to drift too far. Centuries pass in relative obscurity. Viking ships glide up the Seine in the 9th century, their sails dark against the sky. They lay siege to Paris in 845. The defenders pay them to leave. But in 885, the Vikings return. This time, Paris does not yield. For months, the siege drags on. Starvation gnaws at the city. Arrows fall like rain. The river fills with debris and bodies. Yet the bridges hold. The walls hold. The people hold. When relief finally arrives, Paris has earned something intangible, reputation. It is no longer just a settlement. It is a symbol of resistance. By the 12th century, Paris is transforming again. Not through war this time, but through ideas. A cathedral begins to rise on the Ile de la Cité in 1163. Stone by stone, arch by arch, Notre-Dame grows toward the heavens. It will take nearly 2 centuries to complete. Generations will live and die beneath scaffolding, but faith demands patience. At the same time, scholars gather on the left bank. The University of Paris emerges as one of Europe's greatest centers of learning. Theology, philosophy, logic, minds sharpened like blades. Paris becomes not just a capital of power, but of thought. Kings strengthen their grip. The Capetian dynasty rules steadily, expanding territory, building palaces, fortifying walls. The Louvre begins as a fortress, not a museum. It is meant to defend against invasion, not display art. But prosperity brings tension. By the 14th century, plague creeps through Europe. In 1348, It reaches Paris. The Black Death does not discriminate between scholar and shoemaker, noble and peasant. Streets once alive with debate fall silent. Carts carry the dead through narrow alleys. Fear becomes constant, and yet Paris survives again. The 15th century brings war with England. The Hundred Years' War turns France into a battlefield. In 1420, Paris falls under English control. A foreign king claims the French crown. The city, humiliated, watches its own monarchy fracture. Then comes a peasant girl from Domremy. Joan of Arc never liberates Paris herself, but her victories shift momentum. In 1436, French forces reclaim the city. The English are driven out. Paris breathes again. But unity is fragile. By the 16th century, faith once again divides the city. Catholics and Protestants eye each other with suspicion. The tension builds for years until it explodes in August 1572. The bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois ring in the night. What begins as targeted assassination becomes massacre. Protestant leaders gathered in Paris for a royal wedding are hunted down. The killing spreads through the streets. Neighbors turn on neighbors. Bodies are thrown into the Seine. The Seine, Bartholomew's Day massacre, leaves thousands dead. Paris is no stranger to blood, but this feels different. This is not invasion. This is internal fracture. The 17th century attempts order. Louis XIV shifts the royal court to Versailles, just outside Paris, pulling power away from the volatile city. Paris becomes magnificent, but politically sidelined. The king prefers distance from its unpredictable crowds. Grand boulevards begin to appear. Architecture grows more refined. Culture flourishes in salons and theaters. Philosophers whisper ideas that will one day become thunder. By the 18th century, Paris is electric with thought. Voltaire questions authority. Rousseau questions society. Diderot compiles knowledge into the encyclopedia. Words begin to challenge kings. And then, bread runs short. In 1789, hunger turns to anger. Crowds gather. Rumors spread. The Bastille, a medieval fortress turned prison, stands as a symbol of royal tyranny. On July 14th, the people storm it. The fall of the Bastille is more symbolic than strategic, but symbols matter. The revolution ignites. The streets fill with slogans: liberty, equality, fraternity. The monarchy trembles. In January 1793, King Louis XVI is led to the guillotine in what is now the Place de la Concorde. The blade falls. The crowd roars. A city that once crowned kings now executes them. But revolution devours itself. The reign of terror follows. Suspicion becomes lethal. Thousands lose their heads beneath the same blade that claimed the king. Paris is gripped by paranoia. And then, almost inevitably, a soldier rises. Napoleon Bonaparte seizes control in 1799. He crowns himself emperor in Notre-Dame in 1804, placing the crown on his own head rather than allowing the Pope to do it. Power reclaimed. Paris becomes the capital of empire. Arcs are built. Columns rise. Monuments celebrate victory. But glory is short-lived. Napoleon falls. The monarchy returns, then falls again. The 19th century turns Paris into a battlefield of ideas and barricades. In 1830, revolution erupts once more. In 1848, again, workers, students, soldiers, the streets fill with smoke and musket fire. Barricades rise from cobblestones. Governments collapse in weeks. And then comes transformation on a scale no one expects. In the 1850s, Emperor Napoleon III appoints Baron Haussmann to remake Paris. Medieval neighborhoods are demolished. Narrow alleys vanish. Wide boulevards carve through the city like surgical incisions. It is modernization, but also control. Broad avenues are harder to barricade. Paris becomes beautiful and manageable. The Eiffel Tower rises in 1889, initially mocked as an iron monstrosity. Today, it defines the skyline. What was once controversial becomes iconic, but the 20th century will test Paris in ways even revolution could not. August 1914. War engulfs Europe. German forces push toward Paris. The city braces for siege. Taxis famously carry soldiers to the front in a desperate effort to halt the advance. Paris survives the First World War physically intact but scarred. Then comes 1940. German troops march down the Champs-Élysées. The swastika flies near the Eiffel Tower. Paris, once the beating heart of liberty, is occupied. For 4 years, the city lives under shadow. Resistance movements operate in secret. Whispered messages, hidden radios, silent defiance. In August 1944, the Allies approach. Parisians rise in rebellion before liberation arrives. Barricades return. Gunfire echoes again through familiar streets. And then the moment comes. Free French forces enter the city. Crowds flood the avenues. Tears, flags, relief. Paris is free. It has been conquered before. It has been burned. It has been divided. But it has never surrendered its identity for long. The second half of the 20th century brings cultural dominance, cinema, fashion, philosophy. Paris becomes less about political upheaval and more about influence. Artists gather in Montmartre. Existentialists debate in Saint-Germain cafes. Yet even in modern times, tension remains beneath the surface. Protests flare, strikes halt the city. Students occupy universities in 1968, challenging authority once again. The rhythm feels familiar. Paris does not sit still. And in 2019, fire returns. Flames climb the roof of Notre-Dame. The spire collapses into smoke. The world watches in horror as centuries of craftsmanship appear to crumble in hours. But as before, Paris refuses finality. Rebuilding begins almost immediately. Stone will rise again, because this is what Paris does. It falls. It rises. It transforms. 2,000 years, empires, revolutions, occupation, rebirth, and still the Seine flows beneath its bridges, carrying reflections of a city that has never stopped becoming something new. Then we continue. The fire at Notre-Dame did not end Paris. It reminded it. For centuries, the cathedral had stood as more than architecture. It was memory made visible. Kings had been crowned there. An emperor had crowned himself there. Crowds had prayed beneath its vaults in times of plague and war. And now, as flames tore through its ancient beams in 2019, the world watched in silence. The spire collapsed in a single, terrible moment. For a second, it felt like history itself was breaking. But even as smoke filled the sky, firefighters moved with the same stubborn determination that had saved the Minster of York, that had saved cities before. They formed human chains. They risked their lives to keep the fire from reaching the bell towers. If those towers had fallen, the damage would have been irreversible. They did not fall. When dawn came, Notre-Dame was wounded, blackened, exposed to the sky, but standing. Paris has known that posture before. Standing, even when scarred. Yet to understand why the fire struck so deeply, you have to understand what Paris had already become in the centuries before it. After liberation in 1944, Paris did not simply return to normal. It redefined itself. The war had humbled it. The occupation had stripped away illusions of invincibility. Now the city leaned into something else. Culture. Writers filled cafes again. Jean-Paul Sartre argued about existence and freedom, while Simone de Beauvoir reshaped the conversation about identity and autonomy. Painters experimented with abstraction. Jazz drifted through Saint-Germain-des-Prés late into the night. Paris had once ruled by sword and crown. Now it ruled by idea. Fashion houses along the right bank dictated global taste. Dior, Chanel, Givenchy, names that became symbols. The city understood image. It had always understood image. From imperial, triumphal arches to revolutionary festivals, Paris knew how to stage itself. And yet beneath elegance, tension remained. In May 1968, students occupied the Sorbonne. They were not starving peasants. They were young, educated, restless. They challenged authority, capitalism, tradition. Workers joined them. 10 million people went on strike. Barricades returned to the streets. For weeks, the city seemed on the brink of collapse. Police clashed with protesters beneath buildings older than the nation itself. Graffiti bloomed across walls with slogans that felt half poetry, half threat. Be realistic. Demand the impossible. It was not a revolution in the 18th century sense. The government did not fall permanently. But something shifted. Authority was questioned more openly than ever before. Paris once again proved that it could unsettle power without entirely destroying itself. That pattern, disruption without annihilation, is part of its character. The late 20th century brought new challenges. Immigration reshaped neighborhoods, suburbs expanded outward, economic inequality deepened in places once insulated by history. The shining boulevards Haussmann had carved through medieval streets now framed both luxury and frustration. In 1995, strikes paralyzed the city. In 2005, riots erupted in the banlieues after two teenagers died while fleeing police. Cars burned. Anger spilled outward from the margins. Paris is not a museum. It breathes. It argues. It fractures. And yet tourists still arrive in their millions. They stand beneath the Eiffel Tower as it glows gold at night. They drift along the Seine in boats that trace ancient paths. They take photographs of a skyline that has survived Roman legions, Viking raids, revolution, and occupation. It would be easy to reduce Paris to romance. But romance is only one layer. Beneath it lies brutality. Walk across the Place de la Concorde today, and you might not immediately see the ghosts. Traffic circles smoothly around the Egyptian obelisk at its center. Fountains sparkle in the sunlight. But this was once the Place de la Révolution. Here the guillotine stood. Here Louis XVI died. Here Marie Antoinette followed. Here heads fell by the thousands during the Terror. The city has not erased that memory. It has paved over it. Memory in Paris is rarely destroyed. It is absorbed. Consider the catacombs beneath the southern districts. In the late 18th century, cemeteries overflowed. Bones were moved underground into tunnels carved from limestone quarries. Today you can walk through corridors lined with skulls stacked in careful symmetry. Millions of Parisians rest there. The city carries its dead below its feet. Above ground, monuments proclaim triumph. Below, bones whisper consequence. And then there are the moments when Paris stands at the center of something larger than itself. In 1919, after the devastation of the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles was signed just outside the city. It attempted to reshape Europe. It planted seeds that would grow into another war. Decisions made in glittering halls would echo in trenches and bombed cities decades later. In 2015, gunfire shattered an ordinary Friday night. Coordinated terrorist attacks struck cafes, a stadium, a concert hall. 130 people were killed. Once again, Paris felt targeted, not for what it had done militarily, but for what it represented. Freedom, culture, secular identity, candles lined sidewalks, strangers embraced. The Eiffel Tower went dark in morning, and then it lit up again. That is the rhythm. Darkness, light, loss, rebuilding. Paris in the 21st century is both ancient and immediate. You can stand on the Pont Neuf, ironically named the new bridge though it is the oldest standing bridge in the city, and see centuries layered before you. Medieval towers, Renaissance facades, Haussmannian balconies, glass pyramids at the Louvre. The Louvre itself tells the story, once a fortress built to defend against invasion, later a royal palace, after revolution, transformed into a museum open to the people. Its courtyard now holds a modern glass pyramid designed in the 1980s, controversial at first, now inseparable from the city's identity. Paris does not freeze in time. It argues with time. Every era leaves its mark. Every generation reinterprets what came before. When Notre-Dame burned, the global response revealed something profound. Donations poured in from across the world. Governments pledged support. Architects debated restoration versus reinvention. Should it be rebuilt exactly as it was, or reimagined? The decision ultimately leaned toward continuity. The spire would rise again in familiar form, tradition reclaimed. There is comfort in that, but there is also risk, because Paris has never survived by refusing change. It has survived by absorbing it. Think of the Roman Lutetia that became Frankish Paris, the medieval stronghold that became Enlightenment capital, the revolutionary furnace that became imperial showpiece, the occupied city that became liberated symbol, the war-scarred metropolis that became global cultural capital. Paris is not defined by a single moment. It is defined by motion. Stand today in the Marais district, where aristocratic mansions once housed nobility close to the king. During the Revolution, many fled. In the 20th century, it became neglected. Then it revived again as a center of art, Jewish heritage, and vibrant community life. Neighborhoods rise. Neighborhoods fade. Neighborhoods rise again. The Seine continues to curve through it all, indifferent yet essential. Bridges connect left bank and right bank, not just geographically but symbolically. The intellectual quarter and the financial quarter, the bohemian and the bureaucratic, balance through tension. And still, if you listen closely, you can hear echoes. You can hear Roman boots on stone streets, long vanished beneath asphalt. You can hear the chanting of university scholars debating theology in candlelit halls. You can hear the roar of the crowd as the Bastille falls, the drum roll before the guillotine blade drops, the tramp of German soldiers in 1940, the cheers of liberation in 1944, the sirens in 2015, the crackling of flames in 2019. All of it coexists. All of it belongs. 2,000 years. More than 70 generations. One city that has been fortress, capital, battleground, laboratory of ideas, stage of spectacle, target of terror, and beacon of culture. If you are from Paris, this is your inheritance, a city that refuses simplicity, a city that refuses to be only beautiful or only brutal, a city that insists on being both. If you are not from Paris, you now understand why it matters, not simply because it is picturesque, not because it appears in films and novels, but because it has shaped the modern world repeatedly. Ideas born here have toppled thrones. Treaties signed here have redrawn borders. Artists working here have changed the way humanity sees itself. Revolutions ignited here have echoed across continents. And through every transformation, one constant remains. Paris survives. It bends. It fractures. It bleeds. It rebuilds. The stones remember. The river remembers. And as long as people continue to walk its bridges, argue in its cafes, pray in its cathedrals, protest in its squares, and rebuild when fire strikes, Paris will remain what it has always been, a city that does not merely endure history, a city that creates it. 2,000 years ago it was Lutetia. Today it is Paris. And tomorrow it will become something else, as it always has, because this city has never been finished. It is still being written.